Hello, hello. Welcome to Revival Town Podcast. I'm Chuck Tate. That's Andy King.
Hey, how you doing, mate?
Doing great, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
You're doing extra great today.
I am.
Well, because we got a new toy.
We have got some new toys.
Yes.
We haven't used them yet.
No, but we're ready to.
We are ready, and if you're in the central Illinois area and you want to do this with us, make sure you get a hold of us, because Chuck and I are new owners of kayaks.
Yeah, this is your idea and a great idea.
Yeah,
I never thought I would say, hey, I own a kayak.
Yeah, and you know, a friend of mine in Chicago, he was trying to get me to get one of these, I forget what they're called, like the body boards, you know, you pump them up and you can stand on them.
Oh, yeah.
What are they called?
Well, because you said bodyboard, that's stuck in my head now. I can't remember. But it's called a...
What's it called?
Oh, my goodness.
Or is it called a bodyboard?
No, there's a bodyboard, surfboard, wakeboard. This is a paddleboard.
Paddleboard.
Yes.
Yeah, so Mark, my friend in Chicago, has a paddleboard. And he's like, yeah, I pump it up, and if it gets punctured, you know, I got to fix it. And I'm like, I don't want to mess with that. And so I was looking at them, and they're around the same price. And then at Sam's, they had these that were on sale, and I called you up and I'm like, mate, let's invest in our health, well-being, and craziness.
Yes, we will create content for future episodes.
Yeah,
of Revival Town.
That's all we're doing it for.
Revival Town Kayak Cast.
Yeah. So we have bought the kayaks. We have got a couple of different lakes around here that we know we can go to for free. We're going to try fishing, right? I know I am.
You're definitely going to try fishing.
I'm going to try fishing. Yeah. I'm going to get you on that. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're going to have a bit of fun. And as Chuck said, there's going to be hours of content coming out for the podcast.
Yes. Because you know one of us is going in the water.
Oh, I know. And I'm freaking out like, okay, how do we protect the phones? How do we protect the car keys? All of that stuff.
Yeah, we have to get those floaty things you attach them to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Life Fest. We got it. I mean, we're ready. We're ready to roll.
So, yeah, if you guys have any kayak. No, if you have any kayaking tips for us, send them our way.
Yeah, because we're gonna need them.
We're gonna kayak. We're gonna paddle.
We are. We can't wait. So make sure that you are telling us also where to go in Central Illinois.
Tell us where to go.
Yeah, a lot of people do that already. So.
Well, listen, we have a fun episode today.
This has been.
This is a cool cat, and you guys are gonna love this guy. I met him a few years ago through our good friend Blaine Bartell, who was on Revival Town Podcast. His name is Joe Cameneti. He is a pastor and just a cool guy and a great communicator.
Yeah, you guys are going to love this. Don't turn off if it's like, oh, it's another one of them pastors. No, don't turn off, because his story is really amazing. He's definitely involved.
It's a great story. Yeah, it really is.
Involved with church culture, and you're gonna love it. So why don't you sit back?
Grab a monster.
I know I'm going to mess his last name up. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Joe.
This podcast is part of the Edify Podcast Network. Edify is a faith-inspiring app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. Cut through the noise and grow your faith by diving into the world's top Christian podcasts today. Download the Edify app for free from the App Store or Google Play, or by going to edify.app. That's edifi.app.
All right, everybody, it's time for another conversation on Revival Town Podcast. Our guest today, Joe Cameneti, serves as the executive pastor at Believers Church, a multi-site church in northeastern Ohio, planted by his parents in 1983. As a pastor's kid who has spent his entire life in the local church, he has a passion to build God's house by building God's people. Joe has become known for his authentic style of communication, preaching Jesus in a creative and compelling way. And we are pumped to have him here today. Joe, welcome.
Hey, Chuck and Andy, it is so good to be on the Revival Town podcast.
Man, it's so good to have you with us. And so we pre-record these, of course, and our episode that was released earlier this week is a mutual friend, Blaine Bartell. That's how I met you. We were at a pastor's retreat in the Tulsa area and got to meet you and your wife and connect, and we stayed in touch ever since, and here you are.
That's it. That was such a fun couple of days that we got to spend together. I think we even played a little basketball. Chuck can hoop.
Well, you too. We had a good time.
That must have been many years ago.
Man, I was really feeling it too. I was not used to hooping. It had been a while when we did that, and but man, that was just a good time. Great retreat. I love Blaine, his heart for pastors, and created this retreat that was free and invited. I think there were about 20 pastors and then all our spouses, and Consumed by Fire was doing worship, who we're going to have on the podcast, by the way.
Perfect.
But we even rode go-karts.
We sure did. We did it all. We did it all. We saw Blaine's competitive side come out a little bit.
Yes.
And, I know he's like a former junior Olympian. Don't tell him I said this. That didn't translate to the basketball court. But other than that, he's a pretty good athlete.
Oh, man.
And also, Joe is a Revival Town podcast fan.
Yes, you listen. You actually listen to Revival Town.
I actually listen to the Revival Town podcast. Long-time listener, first time on the show. And I will say this. I got to hear it would have been last week's episode with Blaine, and I've heard his story so many times, but it was so cool just to dig a little bit deeper. And every time I hear his story of resurrection, I'm just blown away at what God did. And then it just inspires me. It was cool to listen to that resurrection week,
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah. It was great having him back on and take us through that. Just in the year or so since we'd had him on before, it produced the new book that could really, the study guide that could really help people.
So
amazing.
And as soon as we ended, I looked at Andy and said, man, he's such a gifted communicator. He really is. It just comes out of him, flows out of him. So let's hear your story though, Joe, man. We're glad that you're on.
Yeah.
You do have a story, and you grew up in the local church. So why don't you take us through it?
Yeah. And I want to start by saying, man, I feel so honored that you guys would even want to hear my story. You have had legends on this podcast, and it seems like every week there's some new royalty from Christianity that's on here. And so to be counted among them and even just eat the scraps off the table is great. So, but no, our story is a powerful one. And it started with my parents, my mom. So fun fact, my mom is from Chicago, Chicago, Illinois. So there's an Illinois connection.
There you go.
And I still have family that lives in Illinois. My grandparents lived in Oak Brook and Niles.
Wow.
For many years. Have some family that lives down the block from near like where Willow Creek is. And so, we're there a lot. My mom, here's a fun fact. My mom was born in Little Italy in downtown Chicago on Taylor Street.
Wow.
So to this day, the family, they kept this apartment building in the family. And for the first 4 years of her life, she lived on one floor, and then she had family that lived upstairs and downstairs, and you could walk right out to get some Italian ice and Al's beef. And my grandparents, who were immigrants, Ralph Poro was my great grandfather's name. He was a master tailor for Marshall Fields, and he used to tailor suits for Al Capone. How do you like that?
Now
Oh,
check
come
this
on.
out. Come on now, Joe. So Cameneti is Italian, and that's why growing up, you said before we started recording, that they used to call you Joe Can of Spaghetti.
That is unfortunately true. I'm still seeking healing for that. Thanks for bringing that back up, Chuck.
Yeah. Way to go, Chuck.
It goes with Al Capone, right? But no, that's
does.
fascinating. That really is.
You know, Al Capone, fun fact about Peoria, the Pia Marquette which is a huge hotel here in Peoria, the top floor used to be Al Capone's getaway. And there was actual secret like getaway from the top floor to get him out of the hotel if the police were after him. Did you know that?
Wow.
No, I didn't know that. But did you know that my author photo on the back cover of 41 Will Come was shot on the top of Pierre Marquette?
It was?
Yep.
See, you're always trying to get away from someone, aren't you?
Yeah. By Seth Lowe. Yeah. You know, and here's another fun fact about Al Capone. So the building that Rock Church was in for about 4 years, you know, a long time ago, the Waterhouse. Yeah. There were Al Capone connections with that building, which is above Kelleher's.
Yeah.
So anyway, here we are. So Joe.
Sorry, Joe. We just went off on a tangent. We apologize.
No, but that's pretty
listen.
cool. Man.
This
I
is
mean,
the
right there in
tangent
Little
I was made
Italy.
for.
So do you come?
Yeah, right there.
Do you come to Chicago at all still, or for vacationing or anything?
Yeah, we do. And a lot of times we shoot through Chicago, we go right into Wisconsin. So my grandparents, they now live off Lake Como. We grew up going to Lake Geneva. So like maybe 45 minutes outside of Chicago, hour, somewhere around there. So we go there a lot. Yeah. And I love it. It's my favorite city in America. I love Chicago. Best food city, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
So
I was
We're going to have to meet up there.
I was up there just a couple of days ago. Went to Illuminati's Pizza.
Did you really?
Oh,
what were you doing in Chicago? Did you fly out of Chicago?
No, I went to look at two nonprofits up there that have blown my mind. We're going to be working with them, but yeah, so that's what I was doing up there. And so we've got to go downtown.
Yeah.
So we did.
Illuminati.
Yeah. Oh, come on.
I think, man.
So okay, we better get back to the
podcast. Yeah. Oh.
But Joe, tell us about your story. I mean, obviously. You got a bit of family roots there with Chicago, but your real roots are within the church. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I can start, and I'll try to make a long story short, but it is a fascinating story. My dad grew up with 6 brothers, no sisters, and in a very Roman Catholic, very Italian family in Northeastern Ohio. He grew up in the town where our church is. It's right outside of Youngstown, Ohio, which has been called Little Chicago. And there were a lot of mafia activity going on there in years past. We can't get away from it. But his parents, both Italian, my parents, both Italian. And so he grew up in a very religious environment. There were statues of Mary all throughout their house. They had a huge Bible that would sit on their coffee table. They would put like certificates and documents and leaves in there, which I had never heard of that until recently. And they never read it, but it sat there.
Yeah.
My dad was an altar boy his whole life. And so very religious view of God, but not a personal relationship with Jesus. So he had a brother who was just older than him in the birth order. His name was Dave. And Dave suffered from grand mal epilepsy. And so he was on 21 different medications that he would have to take every day of his life. Got made fun of a lot. My dad got in a lot of fights defending Dave and kind of looking out for him. But Dave was actually the first person in our family to meet Jesus in a personal way. So he started going to this church that was in our area. Fun fact, it's in Niles, Ohio. So my mom moved from Niles, Illinois, eventually to Niles, Ohio. How do you like that?
Wow.
And so
has she been to the Nile River?
So
That's
this is what's that?
Has she been to the Nile River? That's okay.
That's next, right? Okay. Bucket list.
Just the Illinois River. That's it.
A little different. But so it was this kind of thing that started taking place in my Uncle Dave's life long before I ever existed. Went to this church, and they ended up inviting him to go to a church picnic. And we later found out that this was the day that he gave his life to Jesus. We didn't know this for many years later. But he told my family, hey, I'm going to be at this picnic, and no one could go with him. And he wasn't supposed to swim because of his epilepsy. He had to be with someone else that knew his condition. Well, everyone kind of begged him, just tell them you don't want to swim. You don't have to tell them that you can't. And he said, sure. Well, he ended up swimming that day and ended up having a seizure and drowning at this church picnic. And so my dad at the time, he owned a gym. It was kind of like Gold's Gym. And he owned it with my Uncle Tony, who is now a missionary in Australia. And they called it Steel Valley Barbell Club. And so my dad was not a good guy. He was pretty far away from God, and was addicted to drugs, had an illegally owned firearm, would drive into bad parts of Youngstown to get said drugs, wanted nothing to do with God or the church. And he's on his way home from work one night high, pulls into the driveway and sees my Uncle Jim's car in the lot. And it was very weird because it's like 1 a.m. So he thought they were going to have an intervention for him. They open up the door, and the very first thing that my Uncle Jim says to him is, Dave is dead. And he immediately sobered up, and they went through the most devastating thing you could ever imagine, just walking through the loss of your son, your brother. And then to top it off, a lot of the religious people that came through the funeral line, they didn't have a whole lot of compassion. There was a whole lot of like, hey, he's in a better place. You're going to be okay. So it just made him more bitter. Well, time went by. He grew further and further away from God, really wanted nothing to do with the church. And along comes this guy named Lou into the gym. And he was ancient at the time to my dad, who was 19. Lou was 40. So my dad thought this guy's, super old guy. And he paid my dad to start being his personal trainer. And the final thing he says to him when he gets ready to go is, Jesus loves you. And that rubbed my dad the wrong way. He said, are you one of those Jesus freaks? And he said, I don't know about that, but I just want you to know that Jesus loves you. And so my dad and his brother and the whole gym, they made it their personal mission for a long time to make Lou sorry that he ever said Jesus loves you. They used to throw supplements at him, and they would cuss and use every word in the book, just make his life miserable. But Lou kept paying to be trained by my dad and just kept telling him about Jesus. And over a period of several months, it started to soften my dad's heart. One day, my dad gets a call from Lou, and he says, hey, I want you to watch this show. And it's called the 700 Club. And my dad said, okay, I don't think I'm going to have time to do this. I'm at work. And he said, try to watch it. Well, wouldn't you know, for a whole hour, not one customer came in the gym. He watched the whole show. It was Ben Kenchla from start to finish. And at the end, they invited them to make it personal with Jesus. So my dad knelt down in his office in the Steel Valley Barbell Club in 1979. Wow. And he gave his life to Jesus.
Wow.
And today, how cool is this that I'm in our Boardman campus where my wife and I serve as the campus pastors. We're about 2 miles down the street from the Steel Valley Barbell Club where it used to be. Wow. And we're watching people meet Jesus just like my dad did 40 plus years ago. Man. It was all because of this man named Lou that just had the bravery and the courage and the love and compassion to help somebody find them at the point of their pain and love them to Jesus. Within a year's time, all of my dad's brothers, my dad's mom, my grandma got saved. And then this is cool. This Easter would have been about 43 years ago. This Easter, my grandpa was the final holdout, and he raised his hand on Easter weekend to give his life to Jesus.
Wow. That's
and so
my goodness. Praise the Lord.
That's our story.
Man, that is so cool. So then,
yeah.
Was your dad already a believer when you were born? Or was this part?
He was. So,
okay.
Yeah, he was. So he moved after that. He actually had an offer from an uncle. It was the same uncle that helped him finance his business. He said, hey, you can move to California, was a millionaire, had a series of grocery chains that he wanted my dad to be one day take over. And he said, this is all yours. Just come move here. And my dad started feeling the tug to go to Bible school and ended up saying, hey, thanks, but I have to follow God, and moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. So that's where my parents met.
So did they go at Rhema?
They met at Rhema.
Wow.
Yeah, they met at Rhema in the early 80s.
Okay.
And the cool thing is my wife's parents actually met at Rhema at the same time, but didn't know my parents all those years ago. And so Really cool, series of connections. Then my dad actually worked on staff at a church called Grace, all those years ago. Bob Yanyan.
Yeah, I lived in Tulsa for 3.5 years.
That's right. So you know a lot of these places.
Man.
That's great. So he was the young adult pastor.
Say it again.
It's a small world. He was the young adult pastor there, and they offered for him to stay and be the associate pastor. Pastor named George Moss at the time was the associate, and he was moving out to do full-time ministry. So my dad has this offer to stay at this mega church, but God starts calling him back to his hometown. And that was the last place on earth he ever thought God would call him, because, he was there BC, before Christ. So people knew him in the old times, but he could not escape that calling. So in 1983, they moved to my dad's hometown, started, it was called at the time Believers Christian Fellowship. And that was 1983. They actually started the church 3 months before they were officially married. And my mom lived in my great grandma's house. And then now next year, we're about to celebrate 40 years as a church. My parents are still the lead pastors. And it's amazing to see what God's done.
And 41 will come.
That's it, man. Come on. I love it.
Man, that is so cool. What a great story. Man, so your whole life, you grew up in not just the local church, but in one church, right?
Correct. I have never known another church, which is unique. It's a beautiful thing. There's a lot of challenge and pain that comes from a story like that, but also it's the most beautiful thing. I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. And actually, I met my wife at a summer camp now almost 19 years ago this summer. And we reconnected, and I didn't know her really from Adam. I just thought she was this beautiful girl that, I should get to know. Come to find out, our parents had known each other just a little bit, 25 years earlier. And now we have two beautiful kids, and I get to preach every year, and she gets to lead worship at the camp where we met.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, it's pretty cool how God works. But yeah, I've grown up in church my whole life. And I think honestly, like I love preaching. I love a lot of things, but the thing I love more than anything is encouraging church people, and especially people that are in ministry and people that are called to lead their churches. There's a soft spot in my heart for them, because I just know what they walk through, and so that's a passion for me.
Yeah. Well, let's open that up a little bit, because I know. For me and Chuck and others, obviously with me, I run a not-for-profit, but I've been in church world all my life. My dad was a pastor, was involved in churches from, youth pastoring to executive pastor, outreach pastor, creative director, right? Those types of things. So
come on,
church culture is really a big deal for me. Tell us a bit about your church culture there at Believers.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could answer that question by giving you just a tiny bit of backstory. We had a very different church culture for the first 25 years of our church. So, we started out, and really this is probably a product of my parents coming into the faith, and their first experience with faith was in a Southern charismatic church, which was beautiful. And we're so thankful for what God did through that. And, but one of the things that we started to discover is that after 25 years of building this church, that we were pretty good at filling a room. We, for lack of a better word, we had one of the best shows in town. We had good worship in a nice building and reached a lot of people. We could get anybody there once, but we were not seeing disciples made. We weren't seeing lives changed and seeing people follow Jesus the way we knew that we were called to. And so there were some things my dad started to feel challenged to change so that we could reach people that were far from God. And as we started to make those changes around year 25, which we had only ever known up into the right growth as a church all those years, we had a pretty big mass exodus, if you will, from our church, and walked through some of the most painful years of our life. And I've been in ministry 16 years on staff at our church. And I had 1 year where things were normal. And that second year was our 25th anniversary. And right after that, we had two waves of people, probably about 700 people total left our church in a pretty small town.
Wow.
And I don't fault any of those people.
Just so people can get a picture, what type of size of church because you've just said 700 left, and there's people are like, man, that's my church size. So what type of church size were you then?
Oh gosh. And that's, I didn't mean that to be in any way like braggadocious, but
no. I just wanted the
to paint the picture.
Yeah.
You guys, Believers Church has 4 campuses. You're a multi-site church, right?
Yeah. Three campuses. Want to make sure I don't make a liar out of myself. But so it was at the time, I think we probably had about 2,500 people that would call our church home, maybe 1,500 that would come on a weekend. And so it was sizable. It was not a small amount. That also happened over a 3-year period of time in 2 different waves. It happened at the same time as the recession in 2008. So, if you ever want to hear a little bit more of our story, there's a really great leadership guy named Sam Chand. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Sam. Really great guy. And he wrote a book called Leadership Pain. And we are a featured chapter in that book. And so it's not the book you want to be featured in, but I can tell you that we have helped more people through our pain than any one of our victories. And so if I have any pastors or leaders at all, even if you're not a church leader, we still get people that will message us and say, this book changed my life. Your pain brought some purpose into my life. So anyways, all that to say, we made some big changes to reach people far from God. And I don't want to in any way imply that our way is the way. Right. We just felt God really strongly leading us to do this. And so now, my goodness, that was 2008 that all of those changes happened. And so in 2022, we're healthier than we've ever been. We walked through a lot, and we're watching people that are far from God. I remember when we were, just maybe 5 years removed, we ran some of the statistics. And to this point, most of our growth, and when I say most, anytime we would run statistics, about 99% of our growth was transfer growth. We were just, reaching Christians. And that's what didn't sit right with my dad. Yeah. And so we ran some numbers about 5 years after, and 44% of the people that had become new members of our church were unchurched, like Andy Stanley definition, unchurched. And so it hasn't always been that exact percentage since then, but it is a large part of the people that we are reaching are far from God. And so that's a huge, really, I think why that beats so strongly in my dad's heart is because that's who my dad was. He was so far from God. And so I would say for us, a big part of the reason you'll see passion come out of me is because the church has shaped who I am. The church has, for all of its mistakes and all of its faults and warts and all the things, it is still the change agent that is here and is the hope of the world. And I love being a part of it. And so, yeah.
Wow. It's so cool to hear you say that, because part of our culture, part of our church culture is deconstructing. And so many people are leaving the church and leaving Jesus behind as well. I mean, walking away from their faith, dismissing scripture. There's so much of that. And for some, it stems from bad experiences in the local church. It comes from abusive, spiritual abuse, abusive leaders and pastors and things. And I think that, when, at least from Twitter, which is a dumpster fire, by the way, I see so much negative stuff about the church. Like, it drives me crazy because I grew up in the church and I love the local church. And there are people that have been jaded because of experiences, but I love that you grew up in the church. You were shaped by the church, and your church went through seasons of pain and suffering and setback. And here you are on a podcast talking about your passion and love for the local church. So I think that from a wide spectrum on social media, I don't think the church gets the credit it should, in my opinion, because there are some, you'll find, bad pastors and bad leaders. And I mean, you find bad leaders in every vocation, but here's the deal. The church, there are so many areas that should be celebrated. the church really is, you said, the hope of the world. And there are so many local churches that are doing a great job. So anyway, I just love your heart. I love your passion and love what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And we're actually literally in the middle of a series. We just started it last week called Reconstructing. And just kind of the idea that people that are on the journey of deconstructing, most people don't go to church because they've been to one. Like there are some legitimate reasons why people have gripes with the church, and we're all familiar with that. But you're so right. And I think we're in this series, and we're trying to help people to reconstruct and build on a better foundation. Because I think most of the reason that people leave the church is because they were putting their hope in people instead of Jesus. And one of the things that our mantra for our church is no perfect people allowed. Yeah. And so if you've got a whole bunch of imperfect people that are a part of this thing, it's not if we let you down, it's when we let you down. And so even just coming with the right perspective and knowing that, hey, people will fail me, but this is still Jesus' church. It's his bride. It matters. So Amen. It's always cool to hear other people that resonate with that.
And I think I heard years ago, it was Jerry Seville, I think back in my Tulsa days, I don't remember, but I remember him sharing a story about when he pastored and somebody was offended by something. They came to him and they said, look, pastor, we love you, but we're leaving your church because we are going to go find the perfect church. And he looked at him and said, well, when you guys get there, it won't be perfect anymore.
That's awesome.
So yeah, no perfect people allowed. There are no perfect. There's no perfect church. Every church has its own flaws, like you said. So what are some of the things you love about the church?
Yeah. Oh man, it's the people. For me, you know what I mean? Like I love the people. My wife and I call it pastor goggles because we live in a place that most people don't move to, they move from. And, this is called the Rust Belt where we are, because it was Steeltown, USA. Youngstown is smack dab in the middle of Pittsburgh and Cleveland. We're about an hour away from both. And so, 100 years ago, this was booming and so much life. And over the last 30 years, people have moved away. And so people kind of famously say stuck in Ohio. And there's kind of this idea of like, I've got to get away to find purpose. And I call it destination disease, that if I could just get to this sexy city out there, then I could have significance and meaning in my life. But the thing that has kept my wife and I here, first of all, we feel called here. And I couldn't shake that if I wanted to. But it's also just that perspective of the people. Like when we've had moments in our life when things have gotten tough, and my goodness, walking through a pandemic. And the thing that anchored us was the love for the people that we genuinely feel called to reach and be planted with. And so that is huge for us. It's doing life with people and walking through a journey, not just of the good times, but the difficult times that keeps me coming back.
That's good. Well, we obviously in your role, your role is definitely what I would say is the guy behind the curtain, right? Right. Like Wizard of Oz, he's back there, like just making sure things are going well. You can't do that though, unless your staff and even volunteers know the DNA of the church and know the core values and things like that. Can you just go into life of the DNA within your church?
That's such a good question. And a good thought. It's funny, we're actually going through yesterday and the day before, we had 2 all-day meetings with some of our directional team. And we're just talking about where are we going when we, 40 on. It's just such a strategic and significant moment in our church. And although we're thankful and grateful for what God's done to this point, we feel like we're just getting started and God's doing a new thing. And so, that is everything, our culture and our DNA. I think like for us, we definitely, language is important. And so I'm a communications major, and I love the art of communication. I love communication from the stage, but I think I equally appreciate it and use it in our everyday life, especially when it comes to our organization. And I hear that coming out of Pastor Chuck, your church. I hear it coming out of the talk of the Dream Center. You can see there is such a clarity to where you're headed and what is valued. And so for us, like, I'll give you a great example. Just some of the core values we have that we go to often. One of them, and this is birthed out of the changes we walk through. You'll definitely see where I'm going with as soon as you hear this. We just like to say that we build bridges, not barriers. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge thing that shapes who we are and what we do, because religion is all about barriers, right? Yeah. And so often religion is defined by what we're against and what we're not. And I although I think on some level Christianity has to define those things, I think the driving force in our church has been, here's who we are, here's what we're for, and building a bridge so people can walk across and meet Jesus. And so that's one. Another one is that we're married to the message, not the method. And when you've been at church for almost 40 years, you have to walk through several moments where what worked and was yesterday's good idea is now like the brook has dried up, and it's like, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And so for us, I think I've been in this church and in this organization and movement long enough to sit in a meeting now, and I have to solve the problem of yesterday's decision. And I was the one that had the idea 10 years ago. And so there's like a humbling thing that happens too, where you're like, wow, that was great for them, but God's doing a new thing, and I want to be on the edge of that. Amen.
Man, that's good, because we're in the process of rewriting our core values, and Andy is coaching us. We had just a few weeks ago at the Dream Center with our staff and elders, and it is going to be an ongoing process. But our mission statement our new mission statement came out of that, and we're in the process of writing our core values. So it's cool to hear you talk about this, because that's kind of where we're at right now. Looking back, okay, that worked before, it doesn't work now. And in fact, our slogan when we started Rock Church, there's a church in Tulsa called Guts Church. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but the Shears. Well, that was the inspiration behind Rock Church. I was a part of Guts, and originally it was going to be called Guts Church Peoria. We were going to be an official affiliate of Guts Church Tulsa with Pastor Bill Shear and all that, but we ended up doing our own thing. And but our slogan when we started was good people, good rock and roll, and Jesus, because we were doing contemporary church before anybody else was in our area. Yeah, and obviously that's not our slogan today. And we're redeveloping, but when you started talking about communication, and we're married to the message, not the method. For years, our tagline has been same message, different language. Right.
That's good. So I like
that resonates with me, and that's not going to be our tagline anymore, because obviously somebody outside the church doesn't understand what that means, because we've fielded calls in our office of people saying, hey, tell us more about the church and what language do you guys speak? So, but as far as the church culture, our leaders within, they get it. We communicate the gospel with love in a way that people can understand. But Andy's been great, and we're walking through all that. So I'm inspired by you and to hear that. I love the we build bridges, not barriers. Because I mean, obviously there are some churches they're blowing up their bridges. Yeah. So.
Man, if there was one thing we saw in 2020, it was that, huh?
Man. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about COVID, the time of COVID, having most people would know as a mega church. How was that for you? I know just a few weeks ago, when this airs, people will have heard about Lori Wilhite, who was on just a few weeks ago, and they have a mega church in Vegas, and she said they lost a lot of people during COVID, mainly because of Vegas, right? It was people go there.
People lost their jobs. Yeah. Like a big percentage of the congregation was employed in the casinos and the shows and all those things, and all those places were shut down.
Yeah. So how did it work for you guys? How did COVID, I know most people, nightmare, but
it was pretty much smooth sailing for us. I don't know about you guys, but no, I'm just kidding. It was.
I'm like, man, we need to get you to come build a bridge here.
No, I I wanted to build a bridge to nowhere and walk off of it. I mean, it was not, it was like, I think every other, I mean, let's just remember back for a second. For me, it hit, you know, it was that, whatever it was, that first or second week in March, I was actually at a conference, and I remember seeing on Instagram that Craig Rochelle was quarantined. And I was like, what? That was, you know, remember before when quarantine was like, you only ever heard about this in movies. Mm-hmm. And so I just remember, you know, that Thursday, in Ohio, at least, our governor started, you know, there were rumblings that he was going to shut things down. And so we went and, you know, remember, this is a word I never want to hear again, pivoted. Because you heard that like a billion times, you know, unprecedented times and pivoted. I don't ever want to hear these words again, you know?
Yeah.
But I'll just, they're defining in the same way that 9/11 was defining. I'll never forget those moments. And so for me, I'm a people person, probably like most leaders and pastors are. And I have never walked through anything harder. You know, that church split paled in comparison to what we walked through. And so I actually, you know, this is something I get to do often. I get to speak to churches and their leaders and pastors and staffs. And as much as I love communicating to the whole church, my favorite thing that I geek out to do is sit down in a room with 20 or 30 or 5 church leaders and just hear what they're going through and encourage them. And so have you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with Carey Nieuwhof on some level.
Oh yeah.
Phenomenal leadership podcast. Well, have you guys heard the Church Pulse Weekly podcast?
Mm-mm.
I have not.
Okay.
Tell us about it.
I'm excited that I get to introduce the podcast experts to a new podcast.
Hey, and I'm sure that they haven't heard ours either, so don't worry about it.
So you told them about us? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
they're the experts.
Carey will be in touch soon. But no, Carey's partnering with Dave Kinnaman from Barna.
Okay.
And this started during the pandemic, and they just saw this need for church leaders to be able to have a weekly pulse of what's happening nationally and globally, maybe even just in pockets regionally. And so they have this, obviously Barna has this, you know, massive network of people where they can get real-time stats and data. So the whole concept of Church Pulse Weekly is just getting real-time stats and then sharing them with the church and processing them together. So this got me, guys, and I'm sure you can relate to this. I mean, obviously, they're calling it the Great Resignation, and this didn't just affect you know, people in the secular arena. This affected the church, and so they did some polling of pastors. This is from November of 2021. So they're polling thousands of pastors in America. 38% of U.S. pastors have thought about quitting full-time ministry in the past year. This is from November 2021. Now, that kind of sounded low to me, honestly. Like where I'm from, we call that Monday. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Pastor hasn't thought about quitting his church once a week. You know?
Every Monday I drive to the edge of town and think about leaving.
Right. And then throw a pandemic in there and civil unrest and all the race issues and all the very valid things. But man, I think one day they'll write books about it and studies will be done. I think pastors were one of the groups that they emotionally had to walk through, not only just ministering to their families and walking in their people, but then like trying to just navigate as a human being. How do I process this pain? And so I think collectively pastors went through some PTSD. The scary thing about that statistic is it was up 9% from when they polled the same group just months earlier. And so it's trending in the wrong direction. This is the one that got me, though. There was another Barna poll. And so this is a self-assessment that determined the health of pastors. Okay. So this is pastors telling you how I think I'm doing. All right. So this is the one you really need to pay attention to. They measured their relational, spiritual, physical, emotional, vocational, and financial well-being. And this is what they found. Only 1 in 3 pastors is considered healthy by their own definition. And so if our pastors are experiencing pain in that kind of way and unhealth in that kind of way, can you imagine how that's affecting the congregation? Can you imagine how it's affecting the staff that they're leading? This is like the pandemic behind the pandemic. Yeah. And so for me, I think what God really has walked me through, and I want to be very careful not to paint the picture that I have arrived. Like I am daily wrestling with this. But I think on the other side of this, God has exposed some things in my heart that needed to be recalibrated. And I am measuring things in a different way now. And so one of the things that's emerged for me, if it's okay to go there, and just stop me at any point if you'd like to go. I feel like God has been challenging me to measure what matters. And so, one of the ugliest questions, and sometimes you have to say it like in conversations like this, but one of the ugliest questions that is rampant in church conference world and church culture is like, what are you running? And it is so easy, especially in America, to define our value and our significance in the size of our church. How many people are in attendance? And I think what COVID exposed is the ugly truth, which is that we've maybe been measuring some of the wrong things. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I think there's a whole book in the Bible called Numbers, and we count people because people count. We know all the things that, that we should say. But I think what this exposed in my heart is that I was measuring some of the things that didn't matter. And when that got yanked away from me, there was a bit of an existential crisis. Yeah. And then you can connect this with Blaine's conversation. There's all of this unhealth because pastors that don't have their identity rooted in the right things, then they start to medicate. And this is where I think you saw tons and tons of moral failures happen because people just don't know how to cope. And sometimes I've watched some of my close friends, they just, it's almost like self-sabotage. Yeah. Because they can't deal with the pain anymore. And so the only way they can imagine relief is to get caught, to do the thing that they never thought they would do. And it's actually the only way out in their mind. And so what God started dealing with me to do is to measure the miracles. And I'll end what I'm saying just by telling you a quick story. So because of all the things I'm saying, I have a complicated relationship with attendance reports. I'm sure you guys can relate to this coming from the church world. Yeah. There is just something so, it is ecstasy. There's nothing quite like it. It's like a hit of drugs to hear that you've broken a growth barrier. You guys know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, absolutely. Pastors all over America on Monday this week were either really, really happy or in deep despair, trying to figure out if they wanted to do this one more day based on the numbers that got handed to them in an email or a text. Yeah. And it's an ugly truth, but it's the truth. And so I have this young lady that's on our staff. She sends me the attendance reports. Well, she wasn't with us pre-COVID. So she was at our church, but she wasn't on our staff handing me attendance reports. So she was so excited this Christmas to show me, hey, like, look at these numbers. And I was like thinking, oh, bless your heart. Like, this is like 60% at best of what it was before. And so I just remember having this moment where I kind of told her, well, this is what it used to be. And I was just kind of moping that day, just feeling, having a pity party, and I was the only one invited, those kind of days. And Monday. God, yeah, exactly. It was probably Monday. And, but God, he kind of arrested me in that moment, and he started to remind me of who Sam was. So let me tell you who Sam is. 4 years ago, Sam started coming to our church, and Sam was a man. And that's who I thought he was at the time. Had a beard, sounded like a man, was on our video team, grabbed coffee with Sam. And Sam was telling me, hey, I feel called to ministry, and I wanted to become an intern at our church and all these incredible things. Well, I ended up getting this text message from somebody that worked at the church, and they showed me a screenshot of Sam's Instagram, and it was Sam before transitioning and after. And, for me, this was just uncharted territory. I don't know about you guys, but it's not something that had happened to me before at our church. And so we had this decision to make, because the one part of me was like, I am so clueless on how to even help Sam that it would be easier for me to just ignore it and hope that that problem goes away. But Sam had expressed to me, I feel called to ministry, and I recognized that calling. And so it led me to ask a lot of questions. It led me to a lot of prayer. I talked to any pastor I could get my hands on and said, what, have you ever had this happen? And I couldn't find one, not one. And so the number one thing we felt God was leading us to do was just to hear Sam's story and do a lot of listening. And so I invited Sam to the most awkward Panera conversation you've ever had. I tried to get a table in a pretty, lonely spot so no one would overhear us. And I tried to do every bit of listening I could. It turns out Sam grew up in church, struggled with some identity issues early in life, was a bit of a tomboy. Remember, she was born as a biological woman. And the pastor's wife actually told her mom, if you keep letting her dress this way, because she was kind of a tomboy, she's going to be gay. And so from the earliest of ages, her identity and those thoughts were planted in her. Actually, part of it was formed by her pastor's wife. And so lots of pain, lots of hurt. I just kept listening. And finally, she kind of bought into this idea that I was born with the wrong gender and I'm not who God made me to be. And so all of that culminates in this moment where I start to call her to do the same thing I would if I had met a guy that was struggling with porn, a couple that was living together, just not living in God's best. And I said, hey, God is calling you to pick up your cross and deny yourself and follow him. And if you're willing to do this, I want to help you take this step. And I said, I'm even willing to listen. If you have a different perspective or don't agree with me, why don't we come together and let's study the Bible together? Because she had a respect for God's word. And let's navigate this together. And so I thought, I'm never going to hear from Sam again. 2 weeks go by and I get a text from Sam and we go to the same exact Panera, have the second most awkward conversation ever. But this one ended really well. Sam said, I read Romans for the first time. I haven't read it in 10 years. She said, I know what's in it. She said, I started reading it and God started dealing with me that this is the step I need to take. And I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I don't know why I'm saying this, but I know God wants me to transition back to my original gender. And I know I'm called to ministry. Can you help me? And so I was like, absolutely. And we started this journey. It's now 4 years later. And I will say this, the very first thing God dealt me to do was to make sure she didn't make this about what she looked like on the outside. Because she said, I know I've already had a transition surgery. I've been taking testosterone. Like, I know I want to change my looks, but I don't know how to do that. And I've never had this happen in this way. I felt the Holy Spirit speak through me without even having to bypass my stupid brain. And he spoke through me. And I said, you know what? We don't need to worry about the outside. First, let's worry about the inside. And the outside will come along for the ride. Yeah. And so we just tried to protect Sam and create this place where she could grow, kind of an incubator for her faith. Well, now 4 years later, Sam is now legally changed back to her original gender, working at our church. She's going to other churches, telling them her story. She wrote a book. God is just getting started, but it is a miracle. And so I say all that to say that now Sam gets to deliver our crappy attendance reports, and I'm measuring that miracle.
Wow.
That's good.
Man.
That's good.
Joe, that is so good. Man.
Because that's a topic that people would, you're absolutely right. If that had happened, it would have been, in most churches, the condemnation would have come immediately and, hey, there's groups for you to go to. But this isn't the place, right? But yet
right.
you were able to walk through that. Wow, that's a powerful story.
Yes, this really is, man.
And I take zero credit for it. I stumbled. I'm pretty good with my words. I stumbled through everything I said to her. It was the Holy Spirit, but that's who Jesus is. He meets people in the margins. And this is why we exist as a church. This is why we exist as God's church. And so I think all that to say, I think, this is a challenge I'll put out there for any pastor or any church leader or any leader for that matter that is saying, hey, I want to leverage my life for eternity. Let's measure the things that matter. Yes. And will attendance return to what it was before the pandemic? I think we're already seeing some signs of that. And maybe that will come. But that's not the thing. That's a byproduct of a healthy church reaching people far from God.
Hey, Joe, I know that you've hit on a number of things, and we have pastors who listen and leaders who listen, and perhaps it's a pastor who's considered walking away, or maybe it's a leader in the church who says, I'm burned out. I can't do this anymore. I don't know if I can go back. Or maybe even somebody who heard Sam's story and they're thinking to themselves, this is where I'm at. I need help. I need hope. Can you take a moment and just pray for all the above?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do that. God, right now, I just thank you for how you have walked me and Chuck and Andy through so many things. And there are things right now that we are in the middle of the process, and we are still walking by faith. You say without faith, it's impossible to please you. So we thank you that when we walk through trials, just like James says, that it's an opportunity to make our faith perfect and lacking in nothing. So Lord, my heart breaks for every pastor and every leader that's walked through pain. Who knew what a pandemic would take us through? But I know that you care and you empathize with our pain. And so I just pray that as we come to the end of ourselves and at the end of our ability, that it would actually enable us to tap into the beginning of your strength, that your strength is made perfect in our weakness. And Lord, I pray that if there's any pastor here that is struggling with measuring the things that don't matter, that has maybe not because they're bad or because they don't love you, but just because of life and distractions and pain, they have veered off the course a little bit of the vision that you have for their life. Lord, would you let this be a moment where they realign themselves with what really matters? Would you bring strategic relationships into their lives to help them to be healthy? And Lord, I thank you that one day they're going to look back at this moment and they're going to be blown away at how you use this to change them and ultimately to change entire congregations, entire cities, entire families. Lord, I even just pray for the pastor that would acknowledge I've messed up. I've failed my family. I've sacrificed my family on the altar of ministry. Lord, would you help them in this moment to receive your grace and to take a new step in a new day and see life from your perspective. And we just thank you that you say we can come to you if we're heavy laden and you can give us rest. So in a world that tells us run and do more and produce and perform, would you help us to receive your rest and to trust you and walk out better and healthier people? And we thank you for that now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Joe, thank you so much. You gave us so much today to think about. And how can people follow you? Social media, your world, get to know you a little bit more.
For sure. Okay, so I am definitely not somebody that has like a professional social media platform. But if you want occasional posts about what we're doing as a church and occasional posts about food that I enjoy eating and things like that, then you can just check me out at Joe Cameneti Jr., Joe Cameneti Jr. on Instagram, same on Facebook. And then if you want to check out our church, you can just go to believers.cc. And I would love to connect with you. So if anybody, if what I said resonated with you, if there are any pastors in particular out there or church leaders that just need someone to talk to, I would love to talk to you. And you could just email me. My email is joejr@believers.cc. And I'd love to make a connection with you.
I love it. Well, concerning your social media, we measure what matters, right? There's a lot of fluff on there. So you bring substance, Joe.
That's it.
You bring substance. A lot of wisdom there, man. I'm going to hit you up. I'm going to call you. So anyway.
Well, we this, Joe, you listen, we are going to go straight into the big three questions to find out more about you. Do you want to start on this one, Chuck?
Okay. Yeah, sure. All right. Joe, you live in a strategic area. You said an hour from Pittsburgh, an hour from Cleveland. So are you a Steelers fan? Are you a Browns fan? Are you neither? And I also need to ask a second part of this question because you have roots in Chicago. Are you a Pirates fan, Indians fan, or Cubs fan?
Okay, man, these are good questions. Well, it's an easy answer. I'm Cleveland all the way, baby.
Okay, all right.
Which has been a path of many tears. But
well, I'm a Cubs fan. I'm familiar with tears.
But didn't we beat Cleveland
in 2016?
2016.
In the World Series.
Yeah.
Sorry about
that.
That's
we did go there.
A bit bittersweet, right?
Yeah.
You know what? That's okay because just a few weeks earlier, another Cleveland team gave us our first championship, the Cavs. That was Father's Day, 2016. Right. So I couldn't be mad if I wanted to that year.
Until LeBron left, and then you got mad.
You know what? I wasn't even mad then because he gave us our championship.
He delivered a championship.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling. I'm not saying it's going to produce a championship, but I have a feeling LeBron. That I'm going to just prophesy right here on the Revival Town podcast. I think that the return of the King is imminent. I think I think he might sign for $1 with his son Bronny and ride out into the sunset with the Cavaliers one last time.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I really do. I think he'll retire in Cleveland with Bronny. I really do. Yeah. So I think, yeah.
But I'm
going to jump on that prophecy.
Wow.
All right.
Or I'm going to ride that one.
I'm not sure if Andy's with us on that one, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. You're fine.
Go ahead.
What?
Yeah.
I was, I'm a big Jordan fan. And so, my son and his friend would always go to this little barber shop on the south end of Peoria. And they'd walk in and the debate was always going on, Michael or LeBron. And so I'm a big, Michael.
Oh, and that's tough because I love them both. I grew up, because I have roots in Chicago, my best memories are going to Chicago Bulls games when MJ was there. And, they're just two incredibly different talents. And I think it's unfair that LeBron gets, pitted against him, because how do you beat MJ? He's a legend, and there wasn't social media around in those days. He's kind of just a god.
Different world.
He's untouchable. Yeah.
All right. Second question. So you mentioned that you've been in and around the church all your life. If tomorrow you said, you know what, I'm done, what would you go and do for work?
Oh my gosh. That is such a great question. I would have so much fun if I could find a way to do communications in some type of media within like the Cavs organization, something involving the NBA. I would geek out. That would be so fun.
Right on.
Good.
All right.
So, Dan Gilbert, if you're looking for anybody, I'm willing to walk away tomorrow.
Wow. His Monday is every day.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. So last question. You mentioned Little Italy.
Wow, what are you doing?
I'm not a communications major. Little Italy, and you have Italian roots. They used to call you can of spaghetti. What's your favorite Italian meal?
Oh, that's tough. So I would say my favorite Italian meal would be like Christmas Eve. A big thing that Christmas Eve will look like for most Italian families is like the 7-fish dinner. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this.
I'm not at all, but I'm listening.
So like regionally, I don't know if this would be every Italian family, but this is for sure something they did in Chicago. So we kind of adopted this tradition because both my parents' sides of the family did it. But Christmas Eve, it's fish any way you can think. I love calamari. I love anything in that vein. My grandma used to make smelt bread, and it would be the tiny little smelts, and then they would be in this fry bread. There's some acquired taste things in there, but then I love any kind of pasta you can imagine. My grandma made amazing eggplant parmesan, fresh baked bread. Pepperoni rolls are really big around us, which is a little bit more American Italian, but those are amazing. So that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
Andy and I are going to lunch as soon as we end this, man. I'm ready.
Come on.
I'm hungry. Good stuff, Joe. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, your insight. I know people will be encouraged, inspired when they listen to this episode.
So again, make sure you're following Joe. What was that again? Your social media again, Joe?
Yeah, just at Joe Cameneti Jr. At Joe Cameneti Jr.
Great. Well, thank you again for being on Revival Town podcast today. And we just appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you. It was an honor, and keep doing amazing things.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. That was good stuff.
Oh, man.
Man, thank you, Joe. Joe brought it.
He was good.
Man, we build bridges, not barriers. We're married to the message, not the method. Measure what matters. Measure the miracles. That was a lot of good stuff.
Man, you're on a roll then.
Man.
Do you enjoy that?
Let's do it. I did.
What do you enjoy the most?
Probably the talk about spaghetti. No, I really enjoyed Joe's story and his family history.
Yeah.
Talked about Al Capone. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
Little Italy. So
Chicago.
yeah,
Come on.
yeah. What's not to love? I love Chicago. It's one of my favorite cities.
Oh man, I
not
love
the
it.
politics.
No.
Can I say that on here?
You can. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I don't like the politics. Boo! And I did not like the COVID restrictions, and I might offend somebody. For that. But I don't even care because I lost tickets to a Bulls game. My son's Christmas present to see the Phoenix Suns and the Chicago Bulls.
And you lost.
And the Phoenix Suns could win the finals this year. And we didn't get to see them. I had to sell my tickets. Anyway, that's.
But you're not bitter.
I'm not bitter at all. I'm not bitter. I'm better.
Oh, hey. Well, you know what's next, don't you?
A pizza from Chicago.
No.
Okay.
Taking his mate.
All right, let's do it.
So, if you're listening, first-time listeners, this is where my English comes out to attack the American in the corner there.
Ooh.
He has got.
Bring it.
He's got to try and get what I am about to say.
Yeah.
And what it means in American from England.
All right.
So, this one's a pretty cool one. I was watching a TV show the other night, and they said this, and I hadn't heard this literally since I was back in England.
Okay, so.
Okay. So, here goes. I got to try and figure out how to put it into context. My boys, they live in LA, and their bed sits are very, very expensive.
Your boys live in LA and their bed what?
Bed sits.
Bed six?
Bed, BEDSITS.
Their bed sits.
Yeah.
Okay, their bed sits are expensive.
Yeah.
Their bed sits are expensive. I'm going to go with a flat, like an apartment.
Oh, look at you. A bed sit is an apartment.
Really?
Yeah.
I got one.
You got it.
It's been a while.
About time. Yeah, so a bed sit. I don't know why. If you're from England and you're listening,
yeah,
I know. Matthew Hopley. He listens to every podcast right in Birmingham, right in the middle of England. Can you do a bit of research and find out what a bed sit? Like where it came from. That's what we want to know.
We want to research the history of the word bed sit.
Yeah, I mean, I could jump on Google.
Because we build bed sits, not barriers. That's what Joe said.
Yeah. So there we go. So bed sit.
All right, cool.
All right.
I got one. I'm happy.
About time. Took you long enough. So again, I know we say it at the end of every week. I tell you what, tell them about the reviews.
If you guys, for Apple users, I know you listen via Edify. We love Edify Network, and we're on Faith Channel, and we're on all Spotify and Amazon, Audible, all those. Wherever your favorite platform, whatever your favorite platform is, you can find us on there. However, I want to talk to everyone who has an iPhone, because for one, you guys are cool, right? No, so all of our Apple users, iPhone users, go to Apple Podcast, search Revival Town Podcast. If you could just give us a rating or a review, a rating and a review, or a review. If you're sitting in your bed sit right now, don't be a blocker and give us a rating or a review.
Yeah.
And it will help extend our reach. It really does help us. So if you just write one sentence, like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that Tate guy, but I love mate. Whatever it takes, whatever you feel like writing.
Yeah.
I build bridges, not barriers.
I build bridges, not bed sits.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for listening, for sharing. For those of you that don't know, we do have merch available on our podcast website, revivaltownpodcast.com. You can check it out. And we're just glad we get to do this because we do this for you.
For you. But we have a good time as well.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
But hey, thanks again to our guest, Joe Cameneti. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have him on again.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, that's it for this week.
All right, we'll see you next time.
We better go kayaking.
Let's do it.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Revival Town Podcast. Make sure you're following us on social media and remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information, head on over to revivaltownpodcast.com.